So thanks again for coming. Today we'll be presenting our extremely biased and subjective viewpoint on how to create great characters. Actually creating timeless, wonderful, fantastic characters that you can't ever forget. But as I said, it's extremely biased. So who are we? Well, over to my left is Mr. Paul O'Connor. He's our senior game designer at Oddworld. Over to my right, and this is why I always gack it, because it's the last name that gets me. It's Farzad Varahramyan. How close am I?
Close.
Okay, not too bad. If you want to know the correct pronunciation of Farzad's last name, talk to him after the show. And I'm Chris Ulm. I'm the assistant director. Basically, this is what we've done already. What Oddworld has released 2 games, Oddworld's Abe's Odyssey and Oddworld Abe's Exodus. Features our main character, the one that everyone knows that stands for the company, which is Abe. And Abe's basically a clueless ex-employee of a meat factory who finds out that he and his people are next on the menu. And it was Abe that actually got me into Oddworld in the first place, because I found he was a really entertaining and average Joe. And it was Abe who basically sold the games and got people really interested in it. So this is a short way of saying that at Oddworld, our characters, we consider them to be the prime assets and the most important thing for bringing people in and having them get into the interactive experience. So the next game we're doing right now that we're working on is Munch's Odyssey. It features a brand new lead character and a bunch of other ones, too, that you saw in the movie. It's going to be published by Microsoft for holiday release on the Xbox. And again, it introduces Munch, our new title character. So what we're going to talk about today is I'm going to give you a brief background on Oddworld, and then we're going to basically take characters and pull their guts out. So we're going to talk about their hearts, their brains, and their souls. And then we're going to talk about how it all connects together so that we actually hopefully get the end result of a great character. And then we're going to give you some advice, and we'll do some question and answers if we have time. All right, so Oddworld, the straight poop. As I mentioned, what got me in the door at Oddworld was Abe. The first time I saw the character, I went, I really want to work there. But what's keeping me there and what I've really come to enjoy about the last 3 years is sharing Lauren's vision for not only the company itself, but the products and how we go about making them and the interactive experience. So the company was founded by Sherry McKenna and Lauren Lanning. It's committed to basically creating stories for adults that kids will love. That was the quote that Lauren basically sold me on after a couple beers. The other thing I like about Oddworld is that they have some core beliefs that kind of focus all of our character efforts, our story efforts, and everything else. And these are the core beliefs. We believe passionately that the war for the living room will be won with characters. It is the most important thing about the game. Everything else still has to be there. You have to have great gameplay, you have to have great visuals, you have to have great backgrounds, technology, everything else. But without characters, we feel we're not going to win. We also believe that you can create highly designed characters, that it's not just an accident. You can make it happen by doing some of the things we're going to be talking about today. And last, we believe that characters should have some form of nutritional value. So there shouldn't be just stories where guys are getting killed constantly just for fun and games. There should carry some kind of lesson, hopefully without preaching. So when Lawrence set us aside and we started Munch's Odyssey, here was his modest mandate, which is to, I'll quote it, create a living, breathing, three-dimensional world populated with immortal characters that will stand the test of time. Okay. No lack of ambition, the company. So how are we going to do this? So just focusing on the character aspect, how are we going to do it? Well, let's put these characters on the slab and kind of dissect them. There are 3 key elements to interactive character design the way we see it. One is the heart. And this is visual design. This is where a lot of stuff starts, and this is where the first thing that you see about a character is, right? What its visual appearance is. Next is the brain. How does it move and how does it behave in the game in the context of levels and other characters? And lastly is the soul, which is empathy and personality, which together those 2 things translate into having some kind of entertainment value beyond just a character in a game. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over now to Farzad, who's our number 1 heart surgeon at the company, and he'll take you through visual design. Farzad?
Hi. First of all, thank you very much for showing up. It's very nice. I'm the does it look cool guy, essentially. And myself and 3 other designers are responsible for the visual look and consistency of what you see in Oddworld. And the main problem that we address every day is that we're designing characters, vehicles, objects for both game and movies. And they each have their own individual problems that you have addressed and solved, and they have to come together in this slide right here. And the way we approach it is pretty much like everybody else would, through sketches, renderings, color illustrations, blueprints, and sculptures. The things I'll be covering are, the way we get to these designs are through inspiration, the visual read, anatomy and physics, life cycle, irony, and everything's a character. The inspiration, we kind of have, if you boil it down, we have three ways of doing it. The first way is we look at the real world, animals, people, creatures, machines, and we see how they move, how they behave, and how they work. And we try to base our designs on things that we already understand and intrinsically accept. Method B, we always resort also to simplicity and taking basic shapes and combining them in interesting ways and see what pops up. And the third way, mixing and matching, getting this living creature and combining it with this object and see what you get. Just simple ways of just brainstorming. The first challenge, especially designing for a game, is the visual read. And this is where scale, focus of attention become very important and very obvious if it's working or not. And we're designing for these 2 specific applications, games and movies. Here we have a lineup of some of our characters, and I hope it becomes obvious that you can immediately tell the difference between them, which character is which, through the basic silhouette, through the colors, through the scale, and through the posture and attitude. This sketch was done by Steve Ulm, and it's of Abe. And looking at this sketch, you can see that he's solved already the problems that a good sort of movie character requires to have. You can see you can kind of tell what he is and what he's about just by looking at his face, the expression in his eyes, his posture. There's something very funny about his big hands. But when it gets applied to a game, you also start seeing that there's a reason for the big hands, for his posture. You have to be able to see what the character is feeling and doing, which way he's pointing, which way he wants to go. And if you've played our games, you know, the simple "I don't know" right away can show that Abe does. The next thing that we address when starting to design a character on paper is the anatomy and physics. And we study anatomy very closely, and strictly because our characters, a lot of them are quite unusual. And we want to have a foundation of reality that allows the player or the person watching the movie to accept the design on some unconscious level and not let the strangeness get in the way. So as unusual as our characters may be, we try to use actual working real life joints and bone structures and just reconfigure them, because it is this inner foundation that makes the exterior feel more real and more acceptable to you. And at the same time, we also observe real-world physics, how it would move, how it would act with gravity, inertia, and how that comes together. These are some early, well, not early, but these are some designs that kind of show the different stages that Munch can go through, how far he can open his mouth, how much air he can swallow and keep himself afloat or keep himself from being swallowed, and to see if we can still maintain a certain level of reality, physical reality in the character. Drawings such as this show the skeletal structure. This is very important for two reasons. Again, it gives you a foundation, solid foundation on which this design was built, a realistic foundation. And two, a very practical reason. When the animators get this drawing, they immediately know, okay, this is a knee joint, this is an elbow joint. Oh, the spine curves this way, it moves this way. The jaw is double jointed. So immediately they get a very good idea of how this thing could possibly move and act and behave. And here's Final Munch. Another example is Viker's Scientist. I thought I'd bring this up because Viker's essentially started out as this little thumbnail. And the only thing that was appealing about this, I don't get a character out of this, but I get an interesting shape. And when Lauren saw this guy, he said, that's an interesting looking guy. Why don't we make something out of him? And he said, let's try and turn these guys into the Viker scientists, these Nazi, evil, Mengele-like, sadistic bastards that torture and frustrate little animals and kill them and all sorts of stuff. So we started the design process, and this was some of the evolution of the character that it went through. And this was the final design. And even though he's strange, I hope that a certain sense of realism comes across it. If you ran across this thing, you go, wow, this looks like it would work. I kind of know what this guy is about just by looking at him, his expression, his eyes, his coloring. We produce a lot of these drawings. Anatomy, skeletal structure, how the elbows would bend and work, claws, opening, closing. We sculpt the characters. A lot of the understanding of the character and the reality of the character is further refined through the sculpture. And the eyes are the windows into the soul. So what kind of soul does this thing have? If you see an eye like that. And this is Humphrey and Irwin having a little break by the water cooler. Oops, sorry. One of the things that I learned early on from Lauren is that our characters should not look and feel like they're coming from a designer's table. They should feel like they come from a mother. And if you think that way, it puts your mind in a certain mode. And you start thinking about these creatures, not just as designs, but as living characters. And if they're living, they would have a mother and then have an infancy, an adolescence, grow up, get old, and die, which means they would have experiences, that have memories, that have wants, needs. And we very much approach these characters almost like method actors. We try to get into their heads. And it definitely makes it a lot more fun as a production designer. One of the examples is, for example, allow myself to introduce myself. No. This is a big bro Slig. The name hints at what he is. He's a big brother to the smaller Slig. And he just took a different track growing up. He was nurtured differently. He was fed, differently. And when I look at this guy, I hope it comes across that, this guy was kind of raised in a cross between a daycare and like a Navy SEAL training facility. And what fascinated me from the first day I saw a Slig was what's underneath that mask. I always wanted to see the face. And I think the obvious thing would be to imagine these creatures as being horrific. Personally, I think it's far more interesting if you play with the expectation of the audience and present to them, in this case, for example, a face and an eye that hints at someone that could have turned out differently had it been treated differently and nurtured differently. And that's why I thought a more sympathetic, a kinder looking eye that was hidden and bound was more appropriate and a much bigger payoff. And that plays into I think the key element that we try to put into our designs for these characters, and that's irony. Whenever we can, we try to inject some form of irony, whether it be physical, historical, or situational. And as an example, these were initial designs for a character called the Intern. They are sort of assistants to the Viker scientists. But these guys are, when it was described to me, they were described to me as really cocky, really snotty little punks that could care less about you and just arrogant. And I know people like these, and I kind of I can sum them up in a, as, pardon my French, as dickheads. And once I realized that, I essentially boiled down the design to this. I don't want it to be known as the penis-headed character, but I want you to understand where the inspiration for it came. And I hope it grows a little bit beyond that. And I hope that when you look at the design, you get that sensation of his attitude and how he could care less about you, but he's just there to make a buck. And again, drawing after drawing, skeletal structure, but it's important. It pays off in the end. If you solve as many of the problems on paper, which is much cheaper than later on in CG, far more expensive place to figure out the problems. This is the final color comp. And here are two interns in their designer Speedos and Walkmans and backwards hats. Now that we know what goes into an Oddworld character, now we can say that everything's a character, whether it be a vehicle, architecture, object, or artifact. We give it the same level of attention, same level of historical memory. Let's look at some examples. Oops, sorry. Ooh. All right. This is one of our newest designs. It's a Viker Blimpie. This thing goes around, picks up animals, brings it back to the mothership. And looking at it, it's the design. I hope it reflects the egocentricity of those who commissioned it and designed it. And knowing what a Viker looks like now, I hope you start seeing elements of that Viker in the ship. The forward jutting deck, its lower jaw, the eyes, the high forehead. Plans again for its construction. And I don't know if you remember the train that was briefly showcased in Abe's Exodus. When I got that assignment, it was very exciting because it was really the first vehicle that was being designed for Oddworld. And it had to be special like everything else. And I personally, if it's Oddworld, right away I try to take something and throw it off balance. So I immediately took the tracks, put it above the train. That immediately makes everything a lot harder. But that's how things would be on Oddworld, because they would make things harder on themselves. They would like overspend, over-design, just waste. And I thought this series of thumbnails would show everything that I talked about so far. For example, here I'm taking like things that are already basic shapes, and I'm putting them together hopefully in an interesting way. I'm combining locomotive design elements that are familiar already, and hopefully will help you recognize it as a train, even though it's not a train that you've seen before. Basic shape play. First time I saw Empire Strikes Back, I saw those little snow speeders with little, what do you call them?
Air brakes.
Air brakes. And that ship came alive for me. It had personality. And ever since then, if I can, I throw in air brakes. These are some really bad thumbnails leading to this sketch. This sketch was the pivotal because all of a sudden something happened that wasn't happening before. A face started showing up on a vehicle. And as soon as a face starts showing up, all of a sudden you have a built-in tool, a device to show character and expression. The face got refined. You started getting a little bit of attitude. You started kind of figuring out, okay, this is a Gluckin train. Why wouldn't they build it in their own image? They think they're, production design is also very collaborative. This sketch led to the way it moved. I remember talking to Lauren Lanning one day, and he said, "Why don't we make its locomotion system more like an insect? Bug legs, think bug legs." And that's how this locomotive system right here developed. And this is the final drawing. And when you see this thing move, it truly feels like a centipede crawling along the branch. And hopefully there are the air brakes. Aren't they cool? Check it out. Right there. It really feels like it's got history, a background. You kind of get a sense for who designed it, the egocentric mind that commissioned it. Now, for example, architecture. Architecture needs also to have some personality. I don't think this is a good example, but it's where the trains live. This is Fico Depot. This is a better example. This is one of the docking bays on the mothership, the Vickers Lab mothership. Again, once again, you see the presence of the ego of the designer. This is a gameplay building. It's Splinters. It's where they harvest and destroy the force of Oddworld. And hopefully you can tell that right away by looking at the architecture that this thing is meant for cutting down and chopping down trees. This design I had made. It's the leading in shot to Necrum mines for Abe's Exodus, and Necrum right here is the sacred burial grounds of the Madakans. And I really wanted to create the sensation of approaching a cemetery and seeing what do you call those?
Tombstones.
Tombstones, and that's why these stones were designed and placed in the way they were. This light up here that nobody notices ever, still required a design and personality and a sense of history and character. The Scrab burial grounds. This is a design that wasn't used, but if you know Scrabs, there's obvious Scrab design features into this architectural piece that you don't even have to be told. You know that this has something to do with the Scrabs. And if you were to go closer and investigate it, you'd find out the Scrab, we call them Scrabacombs. And even objects. Now, we have guns too, and they shoot things, projectiles also, but they don't have to kill. The way we like to do it is, for example, lung busters, they shoot you with cigars and cigarettes, and they addict you. Why kill you when we can, take advantage of your pocketbook through your addiction? It's a lot more profitable. And even in the objects, we hope that some of the personality and some of the visual cues immediately let you understand what they're meant for and what they do. And having said that, I'm going to turn you over to Mr. Fun, Mr. Paul O'Connor. And
thank you, Farzad. I am fun. Great fun. No, thank you, Farzad. Seriously, can you guys hear me okay? Good. Louder? Is this better? I didn't test my mic before we started here. So, thank you all for coming this evening. And it's a great honor to address you today. Thank you very much. We're also covering a lot of ground here, and we do plan to take questions at the end of the session. In the event we run long and there's no time for questions, if you want to come up and speak with us individually, that would be great too. So, the brain. That's me, I guess. No, that's me. Senior game designer. What's a senior game designer? I'm the is it fun guy. These characters are all wonderful to look at. It's my job to make sure they're as much fun to play as they are to look at. So the purview of a game designer at Oddworld is probably what you'd expect. We do the level designs, we're involved in the character designs, we do AI scripting, we do level layout, of course. I'm going to examine some of the ways these amazing character designs are brought to life inside the game itself. I'm not going to talk so much about how we come up with the ideas, so much as how we use them. This isn't to say that game designers don't come up with character designs, because we do. But as you'll see as the talk unfolds, we really aren't very particular about where the ideas come from at Oddworld, so long as they fit into the organic whole of the project. Now, that being said, as designers, we often have character designs dumped in our laps, and we got to make them work in the game. And that's intolerable, because it's far preferable that a designer come up with some wacky idea and throw it at a production designer or a programmer and make them make it work. But you can't have everything. So if you assuming that you have to make a character work, how do you go about it? And what criteria should you keep in mind if you're creating a character from the ground up? We look at 5 elements, and they're on the slide. There's gameplay functionality, there's player interface, requirements of play, requirements of code and layout, and behavior. Gameplay functionality is the most basic element. It's the most general. It's probably true that every game character needs to have a visual representation. It needs to move, it needs to have health and damage states, it needs to have some means of interacting with the player as an obstacle, an enemy. This is obvious. This is the plumbing. At minimum, we'll create a written description of the character's intended functions and a list of moves, effects, etc. For more complex characters, we do visualizations, either in code or storyboards, etc. It's probably also true that every game character has to have some unique bit of functionality, and this is driven either by the character's design or by the expectations of your game as a whole. At Oddworld, we have 2 signature functions that have to be considered in most every character that we do. You have to be able to control a character by possessing it, and you have to be able to communicate with it using game speak. This requires some thought, because Abe, if you know him from our past games, he runs around on 2 legs, and Munch hops around on 1 foot, but their controls are essentially the same. Now, what happens if Abe possesses a paramite, this 8-legged creature that can scuttle around crabwise or go up walls? Or what happens if Munch possesses a crane, which he can move around and pick things up and drop them? To ensure a smooth control transition from one character to another, the core functionality of that character and the character that it is possessing have to remain essentially the same. They have to respond to the same basic control inputs, regardless of how alien they appear. If we find that something requires a substantially different control scheme to be possessed, that's an indication to us that we've gone off the deep end and we need to come back to reality in terms of what we're trying to make the character control. Maybe we make that a non-possessable. Our game speak sensibilities operate along similar lines. If one of our characters is going to give or respond to game speak, particularly if it's something that we can possess, then we have to think about how that character communicates to other characters. It can wave its arms, lights can flash on the display, of course its mouth can move and it can talk. We have to determine if we can accommodate sort of a universal visual grammar to make sure that the player understands what his characters are saying. So even if you're controlling a slig that's speaking with this extremely distorted, heavy breath through a mask, you can understand what that character is saying. Even if you don't understand the language, his intent and the way he speaks should communicate that to you. Now, talk about character types for a little while. Games are confusing places, right? I mean, everything is going a mile a minute. And as a player, I'm thinking, who's hostile? Who's my friend? Where's the exit? What am I trying to do? Who came up with these controls? Look at all these pictures. So our players are smart. And, they're smart enough to sort these thousands of bits of data and put them into little slots and hopefully arrive at the correct conclusion about who's who and what they're supposed to be doing. Our job is to make that player's task as intuitive as possible in this regard, and that's where character types come into play. We try to group our characters into 3 broad classes, and each of these classes, as we'll show, share a consistent sense of art design and a set of predictable behaviors. So, again, as you see on the slide, we break them up into enemies, allies, and neutrals. The examples I'm going to show you, by the way, they concentrate on living characters, but remember, Farzad said everything's a character. So the same criteria can apply to equipment, architecture, etc. Here's a Slig. He was our standard issue bad guy in the first game. Here's the Big Bro Slig, which you've already seen when Farzad was talking about him. Now, hopefully these guys look like they're all of a kind. They share certain distinguishing characteristics like high-tech weaponry that they carry, or small eyes, or even just a stern expression, or a malevolent posture. These characters are all enemies in our game. And the player is going to quickly come to appreciate that they're going to react in a hostile fashion. These evil Vikers. Now let's take a look at the good guys, allies. These are the guys you can count on to watch your back. As anyone who's played an Oddworld game knows, there are a lot more bad guys than there are good guys. But allies can still look fearsome, like these pissed-off fuzzles, right? But they're fearsome, but the smiles and the big eyes, that should be a tip that they're on your side. There's a Madakan. Madakans are obvious allies. Abe's a Madakan, after all. But there are still some signature elements at play here that tell us that this guy is on our side, like the big eyes, the insecure slouch. In Munch's Odyssey, we have all sorts of different Madakans as well, guys with special weapons and costumes. But we're not going to show them tonight, but even when they're armored up and carrying their gear, you can tell that they're on your side. Now, a neutral character type is the third character class. And on Oddworld, these are generally wild animals. We have industrial guys on one side, native guys on the other, and the wild animals are kind of in between. Wild animals are creatures that will leave you alone unless you mess with them, or you violate their territory or run into them on a really bad day. That's a paramite. Here's a scrab. Now, look at this character. Now, the teeth and the claws are the tip that this guy can be dangerous, right? Looks fearsome. But there's no external armor or weapons. So that tells me these guys aren't out to conquer the world. They're dangerous, but they're dangerous like a bear is dangerous. He'll tear your camp apart, but he's not going to hold your family hostage. And if you can figure out what makes these guys tick, they might even be allies. Here's a rat. He's a reconnaissance character. He's the eyes and ears of the good guys in this game, and he can also give you information. But quest givers and information structure is a different talk. Player interface. Okay, next element, player interface. This is closely related to gameplay functionality, and it ties in with my point about how in Oddworld it has to be a smooth transition between character types if you're going to possess something. The rules for your player interface are dictated by the type of game you're doing. Fighting games, racing games, strategy games, they all have their own grammar. Now, Oddworld games have certain interface requirements as well. We strive for simple control schemes. We don't always get there, but it's what we're trying to do. For instance, in Munch, all the character actions are driven off a single button. It's a single action button, and the result of pushing that button is determined by the context of the situation. So shooting, jumping, pulling levers, it's all off the same button. The player can quickly come to rely, hey, this is the button I push to make something happen. Because one of our other self-imposed restrictions in Oddworld games is that we don't want to put any sort of meter on the screen, a life meter or health bars or anything like that, because we feel it intrudes on the fantasy of the experience. So because we don't do that, we also have to come up with means of finding convenient visual indicators that appraise the player of the status of his character. And it has to work inside their whole, whether it's lights dancing around the character, the color, their posture, etc. These are all things we have to keep in mind. The visual requirements of the character. Okay, now we're getting to the meat of things here. These rules apply whether you're forced to find a role in the game for some wild character that got dropped on you or whether you're building a character from the ground up. The key point is that the visual design of the character must push the gameplay. That's our core philosophy, and if you take anything away from what I'm saying this evening, it should be that. The visual design should push the gameplay. Now, as a game designer, you may come up with a function that you need to perform inside the game. You work with a production designer, and they can accommodate that. But the way it looks has to be the way it plays. So, by looking at a character, you have to be able to determine what it can do, and you should be able to derive some notion of its strengths and weaknesses. So, let's get some more pictures up there. Aha, the greeter. He showed up for the first time in Abe's Exodus, and we had this backstory about him. He was a recruiting robot gone bad, or he's a mobile vending machine that kept killing customers, or I don't know, something like that. I really can't remember. But even without a backstory, I can look at this guy, and I can determine a couple things about the way he has to play. First, he's top-heavy. I mean, look at him. He looks top-heavy. So he's going to wobble when he moves, and if you give him a solid whack, he's going to fall over like a guy on a unicycle. But at the same time, he's got one wheel, so he's going to turn on a dime. And that armored structure looks pretty formidable, but it also kind of looks like a boiler. So if you punch a hole, he's probably going to blow up. And that big mouth, there's no way around that. It's got to come into play somehow. Certainly he's going to talk. And with a smile like that, he's going to be a wise ass. Interns, we talked about them before. They're one of the new characters in Munch's Odyssey. And Farzad has already told you in detail how the character was conceived and the emotional expression it's supposed to give you, but how does he play in the game based on the way he looks? Well, what can we tell by looking at him? Despite that head, he still has a pretty low center of gravity, so he's going to be tough to knock around. He's also wearing earphones. Now, in the game, music's spilling out of those earphones all the time. He listens to punk rock. He's in his own little world, so that means he can't hear the character. He can't even hear screaming or shooting, and he certainly is not going to hear a character that's sneaking around. Our games stress stealth-based play. That's an important thing to know. I can sneak around behind this guy. Now, the requirements of play and layout. This relates to the overall environment of your game and the abilities of your engine. It's the meat and potatoes of character functionality as far as game designers are concerned. So to this point, we know what role the guys play. We know how they move. We know the things they can do. We even know how they're controlled, and that's lots of hows. The requirements of play and layout is more about the whys and the whats. Why is the character in the game in the first place? What purpose does he serve? So some of the more obvious layout requirements are on the slide here. For our games, we needed a basic guard, security, adversary type, so we created the sligs. We wanted to have power-ups in the game, but we didn't want to have things floating up in the air that you jumped up to grab in our first couple of games, so we used shamans that would chant and dispense powers to you. Our first two games were side view designs, and they involved a lot of hoisting and climbing, so we conceived of an enemy that would chase you up a vertical surface called a fleech. And for Munch's Odyssey, we have significant water play, so we've created a character called a stang. He's sort of a shark-jellyfish hybrid. Here's taking a more specific example is a slurg. Each of those examples on the previous slide is something that was created with the express intent of functioning within an environment. I need a guard for an industrial facility, for instance. Now, sometimes this inspiration is once or twice removed. For example, in our first two games, we had motion detectors. They were alarm systems used inside industrial environments. They shoot a laser beam out, and it tracks slowly back and forth across the screen. And if it touches your character while he's moving, it sets off an alarm and something bad happens. We wanted a similar mechanic in our temples and our haunted caves, but the motion detector didn't feel right. It was out of place. So we came up with slurgs. Now, these guys are showing up real close on the game. They were pretty tiny. Slurgs are these little crawling slugs, and they squeak loud if you squish them. So they look different than motion detectors, but they're essentially the same, if you think about it. They require that you slow down. They require that you walk with care and that you coordinate your movement with an outside force. It's essentially the same mechanic as a motion detector, but it fits better inside the environment. So with a little creative thought, you can extend your mechanic all over the place. Code constraints. This is the other half of the requirements of play. It's pretty obvious, I hope. You should play to your strengths in creating characters that will function well inside your engine. And when doing that, try to make a virtue out of a necessity. For instance, the Fuzzles characters that you saw, the little tiny guys with the big eyes and the mouths, and that also showed up in the movie. One of the reasons we created them in the first place was because we perceived a need to have a small character that could appear in large quantities on almost any screen to give it a sense of life if necessary. So, and from that need emerged a character that ended up having a storytelling function inside the game as well, and is also one of Munch's main, or at least intermediate goals, collecting those puzzles. Code constraints, keeping it simple. Again, you've probably heard this a million times this weekend. A good means to determine if you're working within the abilities of your engine are simple AI rules. I think that your rules should be able to fit on a postcard. They should be simple enough that your entire team can commit them to memory and return to them if they start to get lost. So when well executed, these rules transmit themselves to the players in the form of recognizable behaviors. And these are behaviors they can come to depend upon and plan around. And simultaneously, two really good things happen. It makes your characters more believable, and it increases the player's ability to master the game. And through that mastery comes their joy of play. So an example, Paramite from Abe's Odyssey. Very simple AI for a Paramite. A single Paramite is curious, and multiple Paramites are murderous. You encounter a single Paramite and walk towards him, he's going to back up. If you walk away from him, he's going to follow you. But if you get him cornered, or you move into an area where there are other Paramites, their behavior changes, and they attack you as a pack. Interns from Munch's Odyssey, these guys are rat finks. They aren't, in this incarnation at least, they're not carrying weapons. And if they see you, they're going to rat you out. But they're probably not going to do anything dangerous to you directly. If they see you, however, they're going to go sound an alarm. So they're a non-lethal adversary. And that, just knowing that they're a non-lethal adversary, if they see you, they're going to try to sound an alarm. That tells me practically everything I need to know about their AI. Behavior. The last element we consider in defining the brains of a character are its behaviors. And by behaviors, I mean the inherent character capabilities. How does this character see or sense things in his environment? Remember those interns with their sense of hearing being knocked out. For Oddworld characters, we also have to consider some more esoteric behaviors. We look at a range of emotional responses. We also look at the character's position inside his society, his status, which can change, go up and down in the game depending on things that happen. Finally, use real-world analogs to communicate your intent. Now, at Oddworld, Farzad and his production designers have gone to great lengths to work real-world creatures into our inhabitants. It only makes sense that we leverage that when we're doing behaviors for the characters. It isn't cheating to refer to a Scrab, for instance, as being half rhino and half lion. Right away, that tells me something about Scrab social structure. It tells me about its hunting habits. It tells me how it moves and how it attacks. That's pretty powerful shorthand. If you think of paramites as being spider-like, you're going to arrive at natural conclusions about wall crawling and web spinning. And then if you further define them as being hyena-like, suddenly I understand their social structure and their pack mentality. And you can even use some of that irony that was built into the characters originally. So when I see a slig, I think of the guys I hated in high school. And I plan accordingly. So hopefully that gives you an idea of how, on the game design side, we use gameplay functionality, player interface, the requirements of play, the requirements of code and layout and behavior to create the brains of the character. We got the body, we got the heart, and we got the brains, but we're still missing something. And for that, we're going to go back over to Chris Ulm to talk about the soul, the hardest working man in video games, Assistant Director Mr. Chris Ulm, the godfather of soul.
Thank you. There it is. Okay, so we're going to talk about the soul. Just to kind of recap, what Farzad brought up to everyone was how a character is visually designed and what it looks like, and what the process is for bringing up visual designs. And what Paul just went over was how does a character function? You know, how does it do the things that it needs to do, both within the game and within the control scheme and the code and rendering of the engine and everything else. What I'm going to talk about is a little more esoteric and the hardest one to quantify, which is how do you make the audience feel something for your character? How does that character project something to the audience that gets them to feel strongly for it? And how does that translate to entertainment value? And that's what I'm going to talk about now. So who the hell am I? What the hell is an assistant director? Well, this basically it's the isn't entertaining guy. I annoy almost everyone in the various parts of the company because that's what my constant focus is. So Lauren likes to call it being a virtual social worker. And my key job is to get the programmers, the game designers, and the artists all dance together, as horrifying as that may be to visualize. Okay, so getting back to entertainment value, for me, the soul really gets boiled down to empathy and personality. And all this is designed to give an emotional response. So what I'm going to talk about now is personality, subtext, and emotional response. Our goal, basically, at Oddworld is we want all of our heroes to provoke at least one basic emotional response from the audience. Now, there might be others as well. I might want to elicit humor. I might want someone to feel sadness for all these things. But at the core level, I want all of you, when you're playing our game, to feel empathy for our heroes. And I want you to fear, when you're playing, to feel fear for the enemies. And then for all characters, I want you to find them enjoyable to watch, whatever their different roles are in the game. Now, how do we get personality across to players? And how does a character basically use a performance, especially when we're limited to not very much dialogue, we're limited to how much music we can use in a game, all these different limitations. Well, you can boil that down to what I call character tells. And if you play poker, a tell would be a guy who twitches every time he has an ace or he has a good hand. And you start to quickly figure out, okay, that guy's telling me something with his body language. And you can get character tells in all sorts of different ways when you're designing the character's performance. For example, Abe, one of his character tells when he doesn't know what something is, he always turns to the camera and goes, I don't know. So it breaks the fourth wall. He does this thing, and right away you know what's going on. We try to do that with all our characters, both in the CG movies and in the gameplay itself. Another way to get personality that's a very direct and simple way to do it is to juxtapose dominant and with unexpected aspects of personality. Let me give you a couple examples with some characters from Munch's Odyssey. Okay, Fuzzles are the little guys on the ground there. They're warm and cuddly. And if you look at them, they look like they're soft little guys that could be your pets, basically until you get them pissed. And then they attack like rabid dogs. All right. The Vikers are sadistic bastards. They're just really horrible. They hate everything else on Oddworld. They cut them to pieces, except they love each other. And they'll do anything for each other. Sligs are trigger-happy executioners. They'll shoot you before they, ask questions, or shoot first, ask questions later, until they lose their pants and they become, pathetic little vermin that run for the nearest door. Now, subtext. Basically, we also feel that great characters are relevant. In other words, somehow or another, they tie into your world. We kind of view subtext as a fishhook into your brain that slowly is working its way more and more so that you don't even know it's happening until you're halfway through the experience. And the way Lorne refers to stories in general is that he feels that any story is a small boat floating on a sea of subtext. So we take that real literally. So, for example, we'll talk about the two main characters, Abe and Munch. So Abe is an ordinary schmuck who thought he had a good job at this Rupture Farms meat factory. Then he finds out all of his buddies are going to be chopped up into tasty treats. That's basically the core premise for Abe's Odyssey. So what do we have as things that we can all relate to? Well, we've got consumerism, we've got junk food, we've got alienation, modern primitivism, loss of roots, big business. So all these things. There's, of course, lots of American Indian aspects to Abe's character. There's all sorts of little visual cues that are telling us that this subtext is real and that you should pay attention to it. What about Munch? All right, Munch's fellow Gabbets have all been fished to extinction, and now he's been abducted by critter-torturing scientists in search of the perfect shampoo brightener formula. So what's our core things there? Well, we have extinction, we have animal rights, we have conservation, we have the fishing industry, we have the drug industry, we have UFO abductions. So we sprinkle a lot of subtext into our core characters. So how do we actually get the different departments of the company and the different creative people to sort of work together, and what do we do in order to get these characters? Well, the first one is, as you can see from all of Farzad's illustrations, it's a grind. We go through a lot of iterations. Second is that we do start off from simple premises and layer upwards, or at least we try to do that. Sometimes we don't. Sometimes ideas come full flower, but most of the time we have to go through this process. And then we also focus on some names, on how we do names. I'll get into that in a minute. So let's talk about the grind. Our advice to you is that give yourself and your team creative choices. Don't settle on the first thing that comes to mind, because chances are the first thing that comes to mind will be from Aliens 3 or something. It'll be something you saw, something that just popped out as a natural solution to the design problem you were facing. Then iterate more, and don't settle on something you know is weak. I think this is all too common in entertainment in general. Also, keep it simple. The best characters, and this is true of movies, of almost everything, can be summed up in a couple of lines when you really know what their core conflicts are. My weakness, especially when I first came to Oddworld, was to always try to keep adding more and more and more and more stuff. So I want to find out about what their grandmother thinks and who this part of their personality is and where they live and where they used to live and all these backstory elements. And pretty soon what happened is the character got lost. He didn't have any kind of a core thing. So a quick and dirty test is, if you're trying to create a new character that you think is really compelling, can you get somebody else interested in 25 seconds in that character? If you can't, it's not a strong character yet. And if you stick to that rule, you will come up with some great characters. Names are incredibly important. You name things and they become real somehow. It's almost a magic. We spend a lot of time, again, on names at Oddworld. We go through an iterative process. We look at dictionaries, thesaurus. We mix and match. We try to come up with things that are evocative, names that are evocative, and yet at the same time aren't exactly what they are. So let me give you a couple examples. Like a slig. We've talked a little bit about sligs here. Well, Slig sounds like slug. Well, these guys fall asleep at the drop of a hat. They're lazy and they're ruthless. Slig also sounds like it could be slimy. Well, these guys are they laugh at anybody's misfortune. They shoot a Mudokon and they crack up, right? They're slimy, lazy bastards. Slig, the name fits. Gabbit, well, that's what Munch is. He's innocent. He's got big eyes. He travels with a bunch of other guys, or a bunch of his pack mates that have all been wiped out. He's like a rabbit. It's very similar to a rabbit. Blitzpacker, those are the consumer weapons that Farzad showed. Well, they shoot basically beer. It's brew, right? And they addict whoever their target is. Well, Blitzpacker, 6-pack of beer. You've got Blitz, meaning I'm drunk. Also Blitz, meaning I'm attacking, right? So it fits. It's an aggressive brew weapon. And Gluckins destroy everything. They love luxury. They chew up the entire world for their own self-interest. That's a lot like a glutton and the sin of gluttony. And that's where some of the root aspects of our names are. So how do you basically put all this stuff together? And here's some of our last advice, and then we'll get to some questions. First, let characters evolve. Doesn't matter where the idea starts. We've kind of pointed out that sometimes game design pushes ideas. Sometimes it's a great visual design. Sometimes it even comes from on high. Like, we need this kind of thing in, or wouldn't it be neat to do a marketing idea like this? And then it suddenly turns out to be a great character. Don't fall in love with your ideas. When something is good enough, it probably isn't. Use story structure, movies, designs, code, or production constraints as opportunities. So when you come up against a brick wall, try to go around it or try to go over it. Don't just keep hammering your head against it and going, oh, it's not going to work, or we'll never get a 3-legged character in this game because everybody else is a 2-legged character. Try to figure out what you can do. And oftentimes you'll solve problems in more interesting ways. As a matter of fact, some of the best mechanics in Abe's Odyssey came from just trying to solve those problems, possession being one of them. And also, never forget that good ideas aren't convenient, but solving them yields huge rewards. Okay, that's it for our presentation. Happy to take questions and answers.
We'll take questions if you have any. We've got about 10 minutes here till the end of the session.
Yeah, this one.
You guys originally designed Oddworld and the first batch of characters. Is part of the parameters in your mind how far you're going to take games, looking towards the future, so you have to think about how you expand, or you're really trying to contain all the ideas and the concept?
You want to answer? Okay. Absolutely. The concept was always to do, when the first game was started, Lorne was promoting it as the part 1 of a quintology. And the idea was always to take these characters and be able to translate them across, and these databases, and translate them across different games and not be limited by the technology. So it wasn't like we were going to always do one type of game with one type of character. And all the characters were always 3-dimensional databases for the future as well. Does that answer your question? Okay, great. At what point do we do voice casting? We do it. It's a good question. I'm stumbling a little bit because we don't actually have a specific way that we go about doing it. A lot of times, the voice casting actually happens when we need the voices for the storyboard animatics, which is our first stage of creating the CG movies, and that's when the voices start getting laid in. It may already be that there's already an idea early. Like both for Munch and Abe, that's Lorne Lanning's voice. He had a specific idea of what he wanted to do for those characters at a very, very early stage. And he actually went through quite a few iterations that were almost final at one point, which would be kind of humorous to hear now.
Who signs the check? That's essentially that boils down.
The question was, how many brainstorming sessions do we go through trying to arrive at the final shape of a character, and who ultimately makes the call about whether it's ready for prime time?
Are you talking production design, like art, or everything?
Sort of everything. It sounded like
Okay.
it's a very collaborative process.
It is.
It is. It usually starts with Lorne, and then Chris, and then myself. And for example, the Munch design that you see, the very first sketches for Munch, I have them dated back to 1996. And it took 3 years to come up with the design. On and off, on for a month, off for a month, on for a month, off for a week. And it went through a lot of stages. If you saw where we were, and that's why Chris says, there's a lot of places you can stop and say this is it, but it takes a special relationship to continue. And that was the lesson I learned, that the importance of having a director with great vision, but also a director who will push you beyond your breaking point, your comfort level. And it's usually once you pass that barrier that the good stuff starts showing up.
That's why we say that great characters aren't convenient. They really aren't. They're going to show up and they're going to break all your rules, and they're not going to be accommodated for in the interstitial movies that you've already got in the can. And the player's going to look at it and say, gee, the character's a lot more interesting than the guy I'm controlling. And be really upset. But great characters are going to kick down the door and force their way into your consciousness. And if a character is doing that to you, don't resist it. Find a way to get them into the game, because you've probably got something really special.
You also asked how many brainstorming sessions do we have. It really does vary all over the board. In the case of Munch, that was an extreme case with such an important character. Some characters, we've got three iterations and we're there. Some, it's as many as 100 or 200 iterations and we're there.
Right here in front.
Besides serves, have some characters originated in game design?
You're asking, do some characters originate in game design? Oh, absolutely, they do. Well, the greeter was an example of that. We showed that. Also, I touched on the fleech, which was this perception that when we were doing a two-dimensional game like Abe's Odyssey, Abe's Exodus, our characters could too easily get to platforms and observe things indefinitely. We wanted to put a harder push in there to pursue them from screen to screen. So we said, in essence, hey, we need something that goes uphill. And we began to accommodate the concept of that character in our level layouts, realizing that would be a pacing element. But working from that, then our production designers were able to say, okay, how does something go uphill, and what does it do? And they came up with this notion it shoots its tongue, and then it repels, and et cetera. So yeah, quite frequently things come from game design. And that's also a real challenge for the production designers, because Farzad told you he's been working on Munch since '96, so they got a lot of stuff in the pipeline that they're anticipating going into the movies, et cetera. Then when we start bolting the game together, we find, hey, you know what? We need a guy that does this, and they got to go in scramble mode and come up with something pretty quick that's going to satisfy that requirement. Yeah.
Farzad, I'm wondering what your artistic background is when you work here.
Farzad's artistic background.
My background. I got a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Canada for product design. Then I came down to Art Center in Pasadena. I got a Bachelor of Science in product design with a concentration in entertainment design. And then I started working in the game industry because of the freedom that I thought you could have there. And after about a year of that, I heard about Oddworld. They asked me to go up, checked it out, and it was the place where I felt I would learn my craft. Because school will teach you skills. To learn your craft, you need to go out there and find a place where you can learn, and somebody who's willing to teach you.
Other questions? Over here.
Will you folks ever consider putting out a nice big book with glossy pages, The Art of Oddworld?
I think that we'd pay to publish it. At this point, we'd really love to show some of that stuff.
I think there's actually something like that in the works, but I don't know for sure. Don't quote me on that. I never said that. I never heard that, but I imagine that maybe somebody might be thinking along those same lines somewhere.
I have to say, one of the joys of working at Oddworld is patrolling the halls and seeing the production art that's everywhere you look. It's a rich bounty, and we've shown only a fraction of the material that's available. It really is some brilliant stuff, and I agree it would be a terrific subject for a glossy book. Hopefully we'll get that.
And it's teamwork. There's 3 other designers from very diverse backgrounds, and I think that's why we get richness in our world. Is we don't have guys with the same experience who went, basically the same school and grew up. I have a guy from Switzerland, I have a guy from India, and I have a guy who we hired right out of high school. And we get these 3 guys together, and someone like Lauren who knows how to get the best out of people, and you get the work you see.
Others? Right here.
I found this idea of giving architecture and vehicles some kind of partial expression really interesting. How do you think that works in other settings than this one?
The question is that he's fascinated by the notion of giving personality attributes to architecture, et cetera. He's curious how this would work in settings other than Oddworld. Is that the question?
I think I'll just jump in for a second. I think you can definitely make that happen, and certainly that happens in automotive design or any kind of a design right now. I mean, it's certainly objects have faces. They have things that you look at and you either like them or don't. You look at a VW Beetle that has a face that people respond to, and so we push it in a photoreal but sort of exaggerated direction. You could certainly take the same principles that you're trying to use to appeal to people and do other types of worlds. We really feel that most of the things that, actually everything that we brought up here is generally applicable to anybody's vision. If that makes sense. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay.
Totally.
Other questions?
Is this presentation available somewhere?
I presume it's available like any other presentation at the conference. I don't know specifically.
We'll probably have it up on our website too.
Yeah, we're looking into
So
that.
look for it. I think it's going to be up.
Over here?
How do you make regular humans interesting?
Are you talking about visually interesting or interesting in terms of...
Freedom to just, make any character, have big hands, big feet. How do you deal with the shoulder pads?
Well,
Actually, he's got a good answer.
okay, go ahead.
I call it shoulder pad, knee pad design. I'm sorry. You can make humans as interesting as any person in this room. Every single person in this room has a specific personality and character, and you can see it by the way they dress, they sit, the design of their glasses, the way they do their hair. These are all tells, and I think if you're really sensitive to that, you can accentuate those features. I mean, classically, you look at animation. High forehead, intelligence; low forehead, dumb. Eyes close together, not too bright. Einstein eyes. Yoda was based on Einstein's eyes. So there's ways.
And even at a distance, I guess.
Oh, at a distance. One of the lessons I learned early on was silhouette read, especially in the side-scrolling kind of games we did. And you can tell we have successful designs that work and others that don't. For example, Sligs, one of my favorite characters, which Steve Olds designed, often have a very difficult read because of the gun and the way the snout comes, and it's a hard read. And maybe that's why I sketch very small. I sketch small so I don't get caught up in the details. I get caught up in the basic silhouettes, proportions, and broad reads.
Any others? John?
It's obvious from your guys' stuff that designing a really good character is a very iterative process. You go through an indeterminate number of iterations, there's really no way to tell how long it's going to take. How do you guys schedule that?
That would be the producing talk after.
No producers here. Actually.
Yes, right. Actually, it's very difficult. It's what the producers call, what Sherry calls managing chaos. That production environment's always chaotic, and basically what happens is that we run out of time. We say, okay, you know what? We don't have enough time. Either you say that this character is good enough at this stage, or he gets put on the back burner. And sometimes that rule can get stretched, and sometimes it doesn't. But it does make it, all the things we brought up here make it very difficult for producers. But you know what? Good quality is difficult for producers in every field. Guys who are actually trying to make things come out on schedule always have a hard time with doing excellent, cutting-edge, great work. And that's going to always be a compromise. I think, and it could be a good conflict between the creative people and the producing people. And that's what we try to have. We talk to our producers every day. We're not antagonistic. At the same time, we're pretty firm about what we want, and he's pretty firm about the time frame. So we have swapping sessions.
Let me take one more, because it's just about time to wrap it up. Yeah.
Oh, that's a good question.
That's a good question.
The characters and the world of Oddworld are things that our director, Lauren Lanning, has been dreaming about since he was a kid. And, he drew characters on blue line notebook paper, and he really does dream about them. So I believe they were all of a type. Just guessing, he's never told me. I would guess the characters came first, and then the world became a reflection of those characters' struggles. So in the case, I remember in the very early days on Abe's Odyssey, Abe's character originally was a monk, and he was part of a religious order that was suppressing individuality. And in the course of development, it turned into he was a worker in a meat factory, and was about consumerism. So that tells me but Abe didn't change much. His role in relation to the world was pretty consistent from beginning to end. His name changed a couple hundred times. So that tells me the characters came first, and from them, really, the world has sprung. And Lawrence kind of dipped into these. We were talking about the subtext of the characters, whether it's animal experimentation or consumerism, etc. So we try to find characters that can be poster children for those issues that we care about as individuals and as creators. And that also tells us what's going to go into the world. If you can have a character that's based on animal experimentation, then you need people that are going to be experimenting upon it. All right, well, thanks, everybody, for coming. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.